What happens when unchecked privilege and ugly prejudice collide with silent, unassumed power at 30,000 feet? On a routine flight from Atlanta to Washington, D.C., one of the most exclusive cabins in the sky becomes a courtroom of public opinion. A successful black man dressed for comfort is accused of theft by a wealthy couple who believe he doesn't belong. They call the cops, determined to see him humiliated and removed. But they are about to learn a lesson that will shatter their world, because the man they targeted holds a power they cannot comprehend, and he's about to reveal it. This isn't just a story about a confrontation. It's about the moment the mask slips, and the powerful are held to account. The first-class cabin of Transatlantic Airways, Flight 114 to Washington, D.C., was a carefully curated bubble of tranquility. The scent of warm towels and premium coffee mingled with the hushed, expensive whispers of its occupants. It was a world Olivia Smith knew well, but one he rarely inhabited in this particular fashion. Today he wasn't Senator Smith, the junior senator from Georgia, a man whose voice could command the attention of the nation. He was just Olivia, a son flying home on short notice to see his ailing mother. His usual travel uniform of a tailored suit and polished Oxfords was replaced by a soft grey Morehouse College hoodie, comfortable dark jeans, and a pair of well-worn sneakers. His only luggage was a worn leather backpack slung over one shoulder, containing a laptop, a few books, and a change of clothes. He had booked the last-minute ticket himself online, using personal funds. There was no aid, no security detail, no fanfare. He wanted it that way. Anonymity was a luxury far rarer and more valuable than legroom. He settled into Seat 2B, a spacious pod with its own privacy screen, and exhaled slowly. The past week in D.C. had been a brutal session of floor debates and committee hearings. The thought of seeing his mother, even in her frail state, was a grounding force. He pulled out a worn paperback, a collection of Langston Hughes's poetry, its pages soft with use. The quiet bubble was popped by the arrival of the passengers for 2C and 2D. They were a couple in their late 50s, radiating an aura of brittle inherited wealth. The man, Robert Sterling, was clad in a crisp pink polo shirt and khaki slacks that looked like they were ironed onto his legs. His thinning silver hair was meticulously combed, and a gleaming gold watch, a Patek Philippe Olivia, noted idly adorned his wrist. His wife, Cynthia, was a sculpture of blonde highlights, beige cashmere, and understated diamond jewelry. Her face was a mask of polite disdain, her eyes scanning the cabin as if conducting a silent, critical audit. "Robert, darling, could you—" Cynthia said, gesturing to her Louis Vuitton carry-on. Her voice was thin and sharp, cutting through the cabin's hum. Robert grunted, hefting the bag into the overhead bin with a performative strain. As he settled into his seat, his eyes fell on Olivia. It wasn't a glance. It was an assessment. His gaze lingered on Olivia's hoodie, drifted down to his jeans, and finally settled on his face with an expression that was less curiosity and more classification. Olivia had seen that look 1,000 times. It was the look that questioned his presence, his right to occupy the same space. He met Robert's gaze for a brief second, offering a slight neutral nod before returning to his book. The nod was not returned. Cynthia, meanwhile, was arranging her space with frantic precision. She pulled out a silk pillow, a cashmere throw, and a small bottle of hand sanitizer, which she applied liberally. "The standards really have slipped, haven't they?" she murmured to her husband, her voice just loud enough for Olivia to hear. "I remember when flying first was an event." Robert made a noise of agreement. "Tell me about it. It's practically the bus now." Olivia kept his eyes on the page, the words of Hughes, a silent rebuttal to the Sterling's thinly veiled commentary. "I too sing America." The line resonated with a sharp, bitter irony. He was used to this, the low-grade hum of prejudice that followed him whenever he wasn't flanked by the trappings of his office. He had learned long ago that a black man's success was, to some, an anomaly that needed to be explained away, or failing that dismissed. The flight attendants began their final preparations for takeoff. A young woman named Chloe, her name badge gleaming, approached the Sterlings with a tray of pre-departure drinks. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling champagne orange juice. Champagne, of course. Cynthia trilled, taking a flute. Robert nodded for his. Chloe then turned to Olivia. "Sir, anything for you?" she asked, her smile professional, but weary. "Just water, please." "Thank you, Chloe," Olivia said, making a point to use her name. He saw a flicker of surprise and appreciation in her eyes. The Sterlings watched the interaction, their faces unreadable but tight. As Chloe walked away, Cynthia leaned toward her husband. "He seems awfully familiar with the staff," she whispered, the insinuation hanging in the air. Olivia closed his eyes, his fingers tightening on his book. He wasn't going to let them get to him. He was just a son on his way to see his mum. That was all that mattered. The plane took off smoothly, climbing above the sprawling lights of Atlanta. Once they reached cruising altitude, the ritual of the first-class meal service began. Cynthia, having decided the menu wasn't to her liking, had brought her own meal, a small, curated box of artisanal cheeses and gluten-free crackers. She was in the middle of arranging them on her tray table when she suddenly gasped. "My phone," she said, her voice rising in panic. "Robert, my phone. It's gone." Robert, who had been engrossed in the financial news on the seatback screen, turned to her. "What are you talking about, Cynthia?" "It was in your purse." "I know I had it right here," she insisted, patting down the sides of her seat. "I took it out to check my messages before we took off, and I put it in the little side pocket here. Now it's gone." Her eyes, wide with alarm, darted around before landing inevitably on Olivia. Olivia had his noise-cancelling headphones on, listening to a low-volume jazz playlist as he read. He was oblivious to the brewing drama until he felt a sharp tap on his shoulder. He looked up to see Robert Sterling looming over him, his face a mask of stern accusation. "Excuse me," Robert said, his voice laced with authority. "My wife's phone is missing." Olivia slowly removed his headphones. "I'm sorry to hear that," he replied calmly. "I hope you find it. It's a new iPhone 16 Pro, rose gold." Cynthia chimed in from her seat, her voice trembling with manufactured distress. "It has everything on it. My contacts, my photos." "We think you might have seen it." Robert continued, his eyes boring into Olivia. "Or perhaps picked it up by mistake." The implication was as subtle as a sledgehammer. Olivia felt a familiar cold knot tighten in his stomach, but his expression remained impassive. "No," he said, his voice even. "I haven't seen your wife's phone. I've been reading since we boarded." "Really?" Robert scoffed, gesturing toward Olivia's simple backpack at his feet. "You have a lot of things over here. It could have easily fallen into your bag." The conversation had now drawn the attention of the other passengers in the small cabin. A woman across the aisle, a distinguished-looking brunette, watched with concerned eyes. The low hum of chatter ceased. The air, once still with privilege, was now thick with tension. "I can assure you it did not," Olivia said, his patience beginning to fray. "He was not a suspect. He was a United States Senator, and he would not be interrogated by this pompous man." Cynthia began to cry, soft, theatrical sobs. "It was right there, I know it was. My entire life is on that phone." The flight attendant, Chloe, rushed over her face, a canvas of concern. "Is everything all right here?" "No, it is not all right," Robert snapped, turning his glare on her. "This man," he said, pointing a finger directly at Olivia, has stolen my wife's phone. The accusation, now stated so baldly, hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Chloe looked from Robert's furious face to Olivia's stony calm. She was young, inexperienced, and clearly intimidated. The Sterlings were loud, wealthy, and demanding the kind of passengers who wrote scathing letters to corporate if their champagne wasn't chilled to the precise degree. Olivia was a quiet man in a hoodie. In the calculus of customer service conflict, the odds were not in his favor. "Sir," Chloe said, turning to Olivia, her voice wavering, "perhaps if you could just check your bag, just to be sure, to put everyone's mind at ease." Olivia looked at her, a deep sense of disappointment washing over him. He had seen the flicker of humanity in her earlier. Now, under pressure, she had folded siding with the accuser. "No," Olivia said the word quiet but absolute. "I will not be searched because this man has made a baseless accusation. I suggest your time would be better spent helping the woman find her phone, which is likely in her own purse or carry-on." Cynthia let out an indignant squeak. "I already looked. It's not there. He's being difficult because he knows he's guilty." Robert puffed out his chest. "That's it. I want the captain, and I want the police on the ground when we land. We are pressing charges." He leaned down his face, inches from Olivia's. "You picked the wrong person to rob my friend. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Olivia met his furious gaze with an unnerving calm. The irony of the statement was so profound, it was almost comical. He held Robert's stare for a long moment, the silence stretching taut. Oh, believe me, Olivia thought the words a cold, hard promise in his mind. "You're the one who has no idea." Chloe, the flight attendant, looked terrified. The situation had spiraled far beyond her training in de-escalation. "Sir, please," she pleaded, directing her words at Robert Sterling. "Let's not involve the authorities just yet. I'm sure there's a simple explanation." "The explanation is simple." Robert boomed his voice, echoing in the suddenly silent cabin. "He's a thief. I want him arrested. End of story. Get the captain out here now." Chloe scurried toward the cockpit, her face pale. The other passengers were now openly staring. Some looked uncomfortable. Others exchanged judgmental glances, their silent verdicts aligning with the Sterling's narrative. The woman across the aisle, Dr. Rossi, a sociology professor from Georgetown University, watched Olivia intently. She saw no guilt in his posture, only a profound, weary stillness. She saw the classic ugly script of racial profiling playing out in real time. Olivia slowly took a sip of his water. His mind was working furiously, not with panic, but with a cold, clear, strategic precision he had honed over years as a prosecutor and then a legislator. He could escalate this now. He could whisper his title to the flight attendant and watch the entire dynamic shatter. But that would be too easy. It would resolve his immediate problem, but do nothing to address the rotten core of the issue. No, he decided. He would let them play their hand. He would let them build their own gallows rope by rope. The captain, a grim-faced man named Peterson, emerged from the cockpit. He listened with a stoic expression as Robert Sterling laid out his accusation, his voice dripping with self-importance. Cynthia provided a tearful, dramatic backdrop. "My wife is distraught," Robert concluded. "This man refuses to cooperate. He's clearly hiding something. As captain of this vessel, you have a responsibility for the safety and security of your passengers. I demand you have him restrained and searched." Captain Peterson turned his professional gaze on Olivia. "Sir, my flight attendant has informed me of the situation. My primary responsibility is to ensure the safety and smooth operation of this flight. Any disruption can have serious consequences. I would ask you, for the sake of everyone on board, to simply allow a cursory check of your belongings to resolve this. "Captain," Olivia said, his voice remaining level and respectful, yet unyielding. "With all due respect to your position, my answer is the same. I will not submit to a search based on prejudice. I have broken no law. I have caused no disruption. The disruption is being caused by Mr. Sterling's hysterical and unfounded allegations." "Hysterical?" Cynthia shrieked. "How dare you?" "That's it," Robert roared. "He's being belligerent, Captain. If you won't act, I will hold Transatlantic Airways personally responsible for any losses." He then added the ultimate threat of the entitled, "I am a multi-million-mile medallion member, and I sit on the board of 3 major corporations. My company has a multi-million-dollar corporate account with your airline. I assure you, you will hear about this." The captain's jaw tightened. The threat, crude as it was, had landed. He nodded curtly. "Fine." He said the word clipped. He turned back towards the cockpit. "We will be radioing ahead. Law enforcement will meet the aircraft at the gate at Reagan National." Robert Sterling smirked, a look of vindictive triumph on his face. He leaned back in his seat, crossing his arms as if the matter was settled. He had won. He looked at Olivia, his eyes conveying a clear message. "Your little act of defiance is over." For the remaining hour of the flight, the cabin was thick with a poisonous silence. Chloe avoided Olivia's aisle entirely. The Sterlings occasionally whispered to each other, casting triumphant glances his way. Olivia, for his part, simply reopened his book of poetry. He appeared to be reading, but he wasn't absorbing the words. He was preparing. He was thinking about jurisdiction, about federal law, about the statement he would make. He was no longer just a son going to see his mother. He was Senator Olivia Smith, and a gross injustice was being perpetrated on his watch. He had a duty to see it through. As the plane began its descent over the Potomac, the familiar monuments of Washington, D.C., coming into view, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a customer service issue, we ask that you please remain in your seats after the aircraft has come to a complete stop at the gate. Please do not unbuckle your seatbelts until instructed to do so. Thank you." A murmur went through the cabin. Olivia closed his book and placed it back in his backpack. He looked out the window at the Washington Monument, a stark white needle piercing the sky. A symbol of the nation and its ideals. Ideals he fought for every day. Ideals that were at this very moment being trampled in a pressurized aluminum tube miles above the earth. The plane docked at the gate with a gentle bump. The jet bridge connected. The engine spooled down. And then there was only waiting. The silence was absolute. Finally, the cabin door opened. 2 uniformed officers from the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority Police Department stepped on board. The first officer, Miller, was a burly, middle-aged man with a weary, cynical expression. The second officer, Davis, was younger, taller, and had a more watchful, analytical demeanor. "What's the situation?" Officer Miller asked, his voice a gruff baritone that filled the cabin. Captain Peterson met them and gestured toward the second row. "This gentleman, Robert Sterling in 2D, has accused that gentleman in 2B of stealing his wife's mobile phone." Miller and Davis moved down the narrow aisle. Robert Sterling stood up, ready to perform. "Officers, thank God you're here," he began. "This man," he said, jabbing a thumb toward Olivia, "stole my wife's phone right out of her seat pocket. He's been completely uncooperative and belligerent. We want to press full charges for theft." Officer Miller's eyes fell on Olivia. He saw the hoodie, the jeans, the backpack. Then he looked at the Sterlings in their expensive attire. His expression hardened into a familiar, biased calculus. He had already made up his mind. "Sir," Miller said, his tone devoid of respect, addressing Olivia, "I'm going to need you to stand up and place your hands where I can see them." Olivia remained seated. He looked calmly at the officer. On what grounds? Officer Miller's face reddened. On the grounds that you are a suspect in a theft. Now get up, or I'll add resisting an officer to the charge. You don't have probable cause, Olivia stated, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. You have an accusation, which does not meet the legal standard required for a search or a seizure of my person, especially given the context. Officer Davis, the younger partner, shifted his weight. He was watching Olivia's eyes. He saw no fear, no guilt. He saw something else, confidence, an unnerving degree of it. He thinks he's a lawyer, Robert Sterling sneered. Just get him off the plane. Search his bag, you'll find it. That's enough, sir, Officer Davis said to Robert, his voice firm. He then looked at Olivia. Sir, we're trying to resolve this without causing a bigger scene. If you've done nothing wrong, a quick look in your bag will clear it all up. The principal officer, Olivia said, his gaze shifting to Davis, acknowledging his more professional tone, is that an American citizen should not have to prove their innocence to appease a prejudiced accuser. The burden of proof is not on me. Miller had heard enough. All right, you're done talking, he growled, reaching for his handcuffs. You're coming with us. Stand up. Now. This was the moment. The line had been crossed. Olivia held up a hand, a gesture not of surrender, but of command. Officer Miller, he said, his voice dropping into a lower, more powerful register, the voice he used on the Senate floor. I would advise you to stop. Right. Now. He reached down, not with haste, but with a deliberate, almost theatrical slowness, and unzipped the front pocket of his leather backpack. The Sterlings leaned forward, their eyes gleaming with anticipation, certain he was retrieving the stolen phone. Officer Miller tensed his hand on his service weapon. Olivia's hand emerged from the bag, but it wasn't holding a rose-gold iPhone. It was holding a dark blue leather-bound passport holder. With a flick of his thumb, he opened it. On one side was his diplomatic passport. On the other, nestled in a clear plastic window, was a gold-crested navy blue card. He held it up for the officers to see. United States Senate Senator Olivia Smith, Georgia. The silence in the cabin was no longer tense. It was deafening a vacuum where all oxygen had been sucked out. Officer Miller froze, mid-reach, his eyes widening in disbelief. He blinked, as if trying to clear a faulty image from his vision. He read the card again. His face, which had been flushed with aggression, drained of all color, leaving a pasty gray pallor. His jaw hung slack. Officer Davis let out a barely audible breath. His eyes met Olivia's, and in them was a look of dawning comprehension and utter shock. That's what he had seen. Not guilt, not arrogance. Authority. Cynthia Sterling, who had been peering over her husband's shoulder, let out a small, strangled gasp. She put a hand to her mouth, her eyes fixed on the ID card, as if it were a venomous snake. Robert Sterling stared, his smug expression melting away like wax replaced by a grotesque mask of confusion, then denial, and finally sickening, gut-wrenching realization. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked like he might faint. The man in the hoodie. The man he had called a thief. The man he had ordered the police to arrest. Was a United States Senator. Olivia let the silence hang for a few more seconds, allowing the full weight of the moment to crush them. Then he spoke, his voice, no longer quiet, but ringing with the full resonant power of his office. Officer Miller, badge number 482, he said, his eyes locking on to the now trembling officer. And Officer Davis, badge number 519. You are officers of the MWAA Police, operating on federal ground, interfering with a member of the United States Congress, traveling on official business. You have attempted an illegal search and seizure based on a frivolous and demonstrably biased complaint in direct violation of my Fourth Amendment rights." He slowly stood up, not because they had commanded him, but because he was now in command of the entire situation. He was no longer the man in seat 2B. He was Senator Olivia Smith, and the first-class cabin of Flight 114 had just become his chambers. "Captain Peterson," he called out, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "You and your flight attendant Chloe will be staying right here. We have a great deal to discuss about the policies of Transatlantic Airways and the training of its staff." He then turned his gaze cold and hard as granite onto Robert and Cynthia Sterling. They shrank back in their seats, looking small and pathetic. "And as for you, Mr. Sterling," the senator said, his voice dangerously low, "you wanted my attention. You wanted to know who I was. Well, you have my full and undivided attention now." The moment the navy blue card was revealed, it was as if a switch had been thrown on reality itself, plunging the first-class cabin into a state of suspended animation. The air, already thick with tension, seemed to solidify. Sound died. Movement ceased. For a few eternal seconds, the only motion was the slow, steady beat of blood pounding in the ears of those who stood accused. Officer Miller was the epicenter of this implosion. He was frozen in a half-crouch, his hand still reaching toward the handcuffs on his belt. His brain, which moments before had been running a simple, familiar script of authority and coercion, stalled and crashed. The letters on the ID card swam before his eyes. United States Senate. He saw the official seal, the embossed gold eagle, a symbol he was sworn to respect, now wielded as a shield against his own aggression. His mind frantically tried to find an error, a trick, a possibility that this was a forgery. But he knew with a certainty that turned his blood to ice water, that it was real. The man's bearing, his unshakable calm, his precise legal language, it all snapped into horrifying focus. The man in the hoodie wasn't a common thief or playing lawyer. He was a lawmaker. And Miller, in his swaggering confidence, had just tried to arrest a sitting U.S. senator. The floor of the airplane seemed to drop away beneath him, leaving him in a freefall of pure, unadulterated dread. Officer Davis, standing just behind his partner, felt a strange, sickening mix of vindication and terror. He knew something was wrong. He had felt it in the man's posture, in the unwavering intelligence in his eyes. He had sensed the gross miscalculation his partner was making, but he had said nothing. He had stood by a silent accomplice. And now the consequences of that silence were crashing down upon them both. He wasn't just witnessing a colossal professional blunder. He was a participant in it. Across the aisle, Dr. Isabella Rossi watched her sociologist's mind racing. This was it, the textbook definition of a status reversal. She watched the physical manifestations of crumbling power Officer Miller's face, draining of color, leaving behind a waxy, mottled gray. Robert Sterling's mouth, hanging agape, a faint wheezing sound escaping his lungs as if he'd been punched in the gut. This was more than just a twist. It was a violent recalibration of the social order happening right in front of her. For Cynthia Sterling, the ID card was not a symbol of government. It was a social nuke. The title senator registered in her mind not as a political office, but as a tier of status so far beyond her own that it was unimaginable. They hadn't just picked on the wrong person, they had picked on a member of a different species. The Hamptons, the charity galas, the country club, all of it felt like a child's sandcastle about to be washed away by a tidal wave. A strangled bird-like sound caught in her throat, a sob of pure selfish terror. And Robert Sterling, the master of his universe, the man who moved markets and bent people to his will, simply stared. His entire worldview was predicated on a clear, simple hierarchy. He was at the top. People like the man in the hoodie were somewhere near the bottom. This hierarchy was the natural order of things. It was immutable. But the ID card in the senator's hand didn't just challenge that order. It took a sledgehammer to it, shattering it into 1,000,000 pieces. The man he had profiled, insulted, and tried to have arrested wasn't just his equal. He was in the context of federal authority and public power vastly his superior. The smirk that had lived on his face for the last hour had not just vanished. It felt like it had been surgically carved off, leaving behind a raw, exposed mask of utter ruin. Into this vacuum of shattered reality, Olivia Smith's voice emerged. He had let the silence do its work, let them stew in the horror of their creation. Now it was time to pass sentence. He slowly, deliberately lowered his hand and stood up, not because they had told him to, but because he was now in absolute control. The act of him rising to his full height was in itself a declaration of dominance. "Officer Miller," he began, and the sound of his name made the burly officer flinch as if he'd been tasered. Olivia's voice was not loud, but it possessed a new quality, a resonant, steely timbre that seemed to vibrate through the very floor of the aircraft. "Your badge number is 482. I made a note of it when you boarded. You and your partner, Officer Davis, badge number 519, are officers of the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority Police, a body which operates under federal jurisdiction on federal property." He took a step forward into the aisle, forcing the officers to unconsciously take a step back. "You responded to a call, but you failed to conduct even a preliminary investigation. You approached me with a presumption of guilt. You ignored my testimony and immediately escalated to threats of physical restraint and arrest. You did so without probable cause, relying solely on the word of a complainant whose accusation was transparently rooted in class-based and racial animus. This is a catastrophic failure of police procedure. It is also a flagrant violation of my Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable searches and seizures." He paused, his eyes locked on Miller's. "I have to wonder, officer, is this standard practice? Or was it just for me? Was it the hoodie? Or was it something else?" He didn't wait for an answer. He turned his gaze to the younger officer. "And you, Officer Davis. You knew this was wrong. I saw it in your eyes. You hesitated, but you did not intervene. You did not counsel your partner. You did not uphold your duty to the Constitution you swore an oath to defend. You stood by. Let this be a lesson to you in the architecture of injustice. The silent bystander is a load-bearing pillar. It was at that moment, seeing no escape from the legal abyss opening before them, that Cynthia Sterling made her move. It was a desperate, panicked gambit. "Oh, wait, just a moment." She cried out, her voice high and strained. She began to rummage frantically in her large, expensive Hermes Birkin bag, the one she had so definitively claimed to have already searched. It was a theatrical performance of the highest order. "Oh, goodness me, how utterly foolish," she muttered, pulling out a wallet, a silk scarf, a gold-plated case of mints. With all the commotion, I was just so flustered. And then, with a gasp of feigned surprise that fooled absolutely no one, she produced the rose-gold iPhone. "Here it is," she exclaimed, holding it aloft like a holy relic. "Robert Darling, look. It was in my purse the whole time. It must have slipped into the side pocket when I was getting out my sanitizer. Oh, thank heavens." She let out a nervous, tinkling laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Well, I am just so terribly embarrassed. Senator, my deepest, deepest apologies. What a silly, dreadful mistake." She looked at Olivia, her eyes wide with a desperate plea for forgiveness, for this entire nightmare to be rewound and erased. She was offering him an off-ramp, a way to dismiss the whole thing as a simple, harmless misunderstanding. Olivia looked at the phone in her hand. He looked at her pathetic, hopeful face. And he gave her nothing. His expression remained one of cold, unimpressed granite. He let the silence stretch, forcing her to wither under the weight of her own transparent lie. "A silly mistake," he finally said, the words falling like chips of ice. "Mrs. Sterling, a silly mistake is forgetting your keys. A silly mistake is taking the wrong exit on the highway. What you did was not a mistake. It was a malicious act. You profiled a fellow citizen. You publicly accused him of a crime. You attempted to use law enforcement as your personal cudgel to humiliate him. You perjured yourself to officers of the law. And now, cornered and exposed, you want to dismiss it with a giggle and a shrug. You are not embarrassed, Mrs. Sterling. You are terrified of the consequences. There is a profound difference." His demolition complete, he turned his attention to the cockpit door where Captain Peterson stood, as if frozen to the spot. Captain Olivia's voice boomed, snapping the man to attention. "Your name, please." Peterson, sir." "Captain James Peterson." "Captain Peterson." "I find myself in an untenable position. I am a passenger on your aircraft, and I have been subjected to harassment and a false accusation, which your crew, specifically your flight attendant, Chloe, actively facilitated. I do not feel safe on this plane. I do not trust the judgment of your crew. Therefore, I will not be completing this journey with you. I require you to have my gate-checked luggage removed from the cargo hold and brought to the jet bridge immediately." "Yes, Senator, of course." Right away, Senator Peterson fumbled for his radio, his hands shaking. "I am profoundly sorry for what has happened on my flight." "Your sorrow is noted, Captain, but it is insufficient," Olivia stated flatly. "This incident revealed a systemic failure, not just a personal one. I will be speaking with your CEO, Sarah Jenkins, later today. I trust you will inform her to expect my call. I will also require the full names and employee numbers of every crew member on this flight. I suggest you begin compiling that list now." With the situation on the plane thoroughly dismantled, Olivia turned to walk toward the exit. The two officers, Miller and Davis, once his accusers, now parted for him like servants. "You two will wait here," Olivia commanded over his shoulder. "Do not leave the aircraft until I have disembarked. I will speak with you again on the jet bridge." He grabbed his worn leather backpack, slung it over his shoulder, and walked down the aisle. He paused for a fraction of a second as he passed Dr. Rossi, giving her a brief, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. "It was a silent recognition I saw you. Thank you." He stepped out of the aircraft and onto the jet bridge. The stale, recycled air of the plane was replaced by the cool, sterile atmosphere of the airport terminal. The transition felt symbolic, like crossing a border from a war zone back into a civilized world he was now in charge of. As promised, a ground crew member was already waiting, holding his single checked suitcase. He pulled out his personal cell phone. He ignored the flood of notifications and dialed a number from memory, a number he could call at any hour of any day. "Daniel, it's Olivia," he said. His voice was calm, but it was the calm of a general directing a battle. "I'm fine, but my travel has been disrupted. I'm at DCA. I need you to do several things for me immediately." He began to pace the length of the jet bridge, his voice low but decisive. "First, cancel my afternoon. I won't be getting to Atlanta until much later. Rebook me on the next available flight, any carrier except Transatlantic Airways. Use the emergency congressional fund. This is now official business. Second, I need you to contact the office of Chief Anson, head of the MWWLA Police. Inform him that I will be filing a formal complaint against 2 of his officers for misconduct, and a violation of my civil rights. He needs to call my cell phone within 30 minutes. Third, get me the direct office line and the home number for Sarah Jenkins, the CEO of Transatlantic Airways. I'll be calling her personally. Yes, Daniel, the home number too. She can take the call after she's put her children to bed. I find that makes an impression. He paused, looking back through the small window of the jet bridge at the police officers who were now emerging from the plane, their heads bowed. Also, Daniel, he continued, a new steely edge to his voice. I want you to start a file. Title it, Passengers Trust and Dignity Act. I want every FAA statistic on discriminatory incidents for the past 5 years. I want a list of every civil suit filed against the major U.S. carriers for similar issues. The people who started this, they thought they were just putting a man in a hoodie in his place. They have no idea what they've actually done. They've just launched a legislative campaign. He hung up. He stood there for a moment, in the quiet of the jet bridge, the muffled sounds of the busy airport, a distant hum. He thought of his mother, waiting for him in Atlanta. The purpose of his journey had been love and comfort, but along the way it had been intercepted by hate and prejudice, and in his world, a world of consequence and power, such an act could not go unanswered. The Sterlings had wanted to make an example of him. He looked toward the terminal, his jaw set. So be it. He would make an example of them, while Senator Olivia Smith was methodically setting the gears of consequence into motion from the sterile quiet of the jet bridge. The seeds of a more organic public reckoning were already being sown back on Flight 114. Dr. Isabella Rossi, the Georgetown sociologist, remained in her seat, her mind ablaze. She hadn't just witnessed an argument. She had witnessed a living, breathing data set on power prejudice and social dynamics. As the other passengers began to file out, hushed and wide-eyed, she pulled out her university-issued laptop connected to the airport Wi-Fi and began to type. She didn't write a mere angry tweet. She composed a thread meticulously structured with the precision of an academic paper. 1 a case study in real time, the weaponization of privilege at 30,000 feet. TAA Flight 114. The following is a witness account of events viewed through a sociological lens. While flying while black. Time 114. 2 horse. The subjects, a white, apparently affluent couple hereafter, the accusers, and a black man dressed casually hereafter, the accused. From the outset, the accusers established a narrative of exclusion with audible comments on the declining standards of first class upon observing the accused. She continued, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She detailed the false accusation, the theatrical panic over the phone, the immediate presumption of guilt by the flight attendant, and the aggressive certitude of Robert Sterling. She quoted his entitled proclamations and his demands for an arrest. Then she described the senator's response, not his title, which she intentionally withheld for dramatic effect until the end, but his posture of radical calm, his refusal to perform guilt, and his precise Socratic deconstruction of the captain's and officer's logic. She culminated the thread with the reveal describing the senator's ID not as a weapon, but as an irrefutable counter-narrative that shattered the framework of the accuser's reality. She posted it tagged 3 national political reporters she knew, respected her work, and closed her laptop. She had no idea she had just lit a fuse to a powder keg. By the time Robert and Cynthia Sterling deplaned walking through the terminal in a zombie-like trance of shame and fear, Dr. Rossi's thread was already being retweeted hundreds of times a minute. The story was out, and the cascade of karma had begun. For Robert Sterling, the deluge hit the next morning. He was in his mahogany-paneled home office, a room that had always been his fortress of solitude and power, barking into the phone at his frantic PR team. but it was like trying to patch a bursting dam with chewing gum. The story was the lead item on every major news network. His name and photo were everywhere. At 9:15 a.m., his private line rang. It was Arthur Vance, the famously stoic chief investment officer of the California Teachers' Retirement System, Sterling Capital's largest and most important client. Robert Arthur said, his voice devoid of any warmth. There was no preamble. "We are invoking the reputational risk clause in our limited partnership agreement. Consider this your official notice. We will be redeeming our full position effective immediately." Robert felt the blood drain from his face. "Arthur, wait. It's a misunderstanding. It's been blown completely out of proportion. You can't pull $300 million based on some Twitter gossip." "It's not gossip when it's corroborated by a U.S. Senator's office," Robert Vance replied coolly. "My members are public school teachers. We cannot have their retirement funds managed by a man who embodies the very prejudice they teach against. The optics are untenable. The decision is final. A formal letter is on its way." The line went dead. That call was the first stone in an avalanche. Before noon, 3 more institutional investors had pulled out. By 1:00 p.m., an emergency virtual board meeting was convened. Robert logged on his face, a grim mask ready to fight. He was met by a grid of stony-faced men and women who just last week had been his deferential partners and friends. "This is a contained event." Robert began, his voice strained. "We release a statement. We apologize. We make a donation." It was Michael Chen, the board's most pragmatic member, who cut him off. "Robert, it's not contained. The fund is bleeding assets by the hour. Your name is the anchor, dragging us to the bottom. Your personal conduct has become a fatal liability to our fiduciary duty." Robert stared in disbelief. "My personal conduct, I built this firm. My name is on the door. And today, that is the problem." Chen said, his voice flat and final. "The board has voted. We're exercising the termination clause in your contract. You are to resign as a CEO and chairman effective immediately. We'll draft a generous severance, but you will be out by the end of the day." Robert Sterling, the titan, the predator, the man who prided himself on his killer instinct, had been devoured by his own board. He slammed his laptop shut, the sound echoing in the silent, opulent office that was no longer his. He had lost his company, his power, his identity. All for a moment of ugly, thoughtless pride. Cynthia Sterling's downfall was quieter but no less complete. Her karma arrived via text messages and emails. A curt 2-sentence email from the Children's Hospital Foundation informed her that her resignation from the board had been accepted. Her friend Catherine, the organizer of her social circle, sent a text, "Cynthia, I think it's best if you sit out the book club meeting this week. Things are just very tense." The ultimate blow came when she drove to her country club, desperate for a sliver of normalcy. As she walked into the grill room, the lively chatter suddenly died. People didn't glare. They simply looked away, their faces blank as if she were a ghost. Her regular table of friends was there, but they were engrossed in a sudden, intense study of their menus. She stood there for a full minute, exposed and invisible, before turning and fleeing the silence chasing her out the door. Her social currency, built over a lifetime of carefully managed appearances, had been rendered utterly worthless. The corporate and institutional fallout was just as swift. Transatlantic Airways stock was in free fall. In a packed crisis room at their Atlanta headquarters, CEO Sarah Jenkins stared at a bank of screens flashing red. The hashtag Rasa Boycott Transatlantic was gaining traction. "What's the update from D.C.?" she snapped at a pale-faced VP. "Senator Smith's office is refusing our calls, Madam CEO," the VP stammered. "They said the senator will be communicating directly with you at a time of his choosing. His chief of staff also requested a full record of every discrimination complaint filed against us in the last decade. Sarah Jenkins felt a chill. This wasn't a PR crisis anymore. It was a political one. Smith wasn't just looking for an apology, he was building a case. Her hand was forced. She held a press conference that afternoon announcing the immediate termination of Captain Peterson and flight attendant Chloe, and pledging a complete overhaul of their training protocols. It did little to stop the bleeding. Meanwhile, at the MWAA police headquarters, Officer Miller sat in a small, windowless room, facing two stern-faced internal affairs investigators. His swagger was gone, replaced by a sweaty, desperate plea. It was no use. His record, combined with the testimony of Officer Davis and the damning complaint from a U.S. senator, sealed his fate. He was suspended without pay, pending termination. Chief Anson, after his humiliating call with Senator Smith, issued a public apology that was a masterclass in bureaucratic self-flagellation. 2 weeks later, the final act of the drama unfolded on the one stage that mattered most. Senator Olivia Smith, looking impeccable in a dark navy suit, stood on the Senate floor. The galleries were packed. Every camera was on him. "Mr. President," he began, his voice resonating with quiet authority. "I rise today to speak about a journey not from one city to another, but from a presumption of guilt to a proof of innocence, a journey no citizen should be forced to take." He detailed the incident on Flight 114, not with rancor, but with the cool, analytical precision of a prosecutor laying out his case. He used the data his staff had gathered. This was not an isolated incident, he declared, his voice rising. The FAA reports a 30% increase in complaints of discriminatory treatment on commercial flights over the last 2 years. My office has reviewed dozens of lawsuits filed against airlines, including transatlantic, that tell a similar story, stories of passengers of color, passengers with disabilities, passengers who were deemed other and treated as threats. For too long, these have been dismissed as customer service issues. They are not. They are civil rights issues. He held up a thick, bound document. That is why today, along with a bipartisan group of my colleagues, I am introducing S. 1864, the Passengers' Trust and Dignity Act. This bill will do 3 things. It will establish a federally mandated uniform standard for de-escalation and implicit bias training for all airline personnel and airport security. It will create a new streamlined office within the Department of Transportation to investigate and adjudicate these complaints. And it will impose steep punitive fines on carriers who demonstrate a pattern of discriminatory conduct. Because if an airline can charge you a fee for an extra bag, they should pay a penalty for taking your dignity. When he finished, a powerful silence held the chamber before it was broken by a wave of applause from both sides of the aisle. He had taken a moment of personal humiliation and masterfully forged it into a powerful instrument of national policy. That evening, his legislative work done, Olivia took the last flight to Atlanta. He drove his simple rental car not to a fancy hotel, but to the small brick ranch house in the neighborhood where he was raised. The lights were on. He found his mother, Eliana Smith, sitting in her armchair, a photo album open on her lap. She looked up as he entered, her smile warm and knowing. The chaos of Washington felt 1,000,000 miles away. "I was worried," she said softly, her voice still retaining its musical Georgian lilt. "Daniel called. He told me there was some trouble on the plane." Olivia knelt beside her chair, his senatorial armor melting away, leaving only the sun. There was some trouble, he admitted, taking her hand. "But we're fixing it." She patted his hand, her gaze moving from his face to a picture in the album. It was a photo of a much younger Olivia, perhaps 10 years old, standing next to his late father, a proud, smiling man in a postal worker's uniform. "Your father," she said, her voice thick with memory. "He always told you, son, never let anyone else's smallness make you small." "It seems you listened." Olivia looked at the photo, then back at his mother. The noise of the past 2 weeks, the shouting, the apologies, the stock tickers, the gavels, all of it faded away, replaced by the gentle, steady rhythm of the old grandfather clock in the hall. The fight was not over, but here in this room, holding his mother's hand, he understood the purpose of it all. He wasn't just a senator. He was Eliana and James Smith's son. And he was home. The story of Senator Olivia Smith isn't just about the epic downfall of the entitled. It's a powerful reminder that the fight for dignity happens everywhere in the halls of Congress and in the first-class cabin of an airplane. It shows us that true strength isn't about how loudly you can shout, but how calmly you can stand in your truth, armed with integrity. The karma that found the Sterlings and transatlantic airways wasn't magic. It was the direct consequence of their own actions brought to light by a man they wrongfully underestimated. If this story of justice and accountability resonated with you, please hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with others so they can witness this incredible story of when prejudice met its match. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell for more true stories where karma delivers the final, undeniable verdict. What did you think of the senator's response? Let us know in the comments below.